I'm starting recording. All right, so we're recording. All right, so what I'm going to do first is I just want to show you, this is Bob Greenis did the, three of you did the exercise, and again, the improvement, here's the first drawing, freehand, and then the second drawing with the grid, and then his third drawing, we basically put the grid and the first drawing aside and didn't look at it. And it's basically, I think his last drawing is actually better than the grid. And it's really close to what I sent you guys. So it's essentially really close to the drawing that I sent you. So that just goes to show you how this exercise works. And then again, his hands even were better because I'm assuming you did the hands after you did this sequence.
Yeah.
And again, the hands are really, really close.
I did them from the photograph rather than from your drawing. So.
Oh, okay. Well,
that's why the position's a little different.
But it's still, the improvement is, you know, it's almost dead on what I did, because the sequence of doing the grid, you basically were forced to use the right side of your brain to transfer it to, you know, from what I sent you to your drawing. And so that basically carried over into your hands, which I think you did second after you did the portrait. Right. And also, Marlene, I think the same thing happened with you. Your hands were actually better than the portrait because you did them after you did the portrait. So again, it was just that one procedure, doing the grid on the portrait or even on the hands. You're getting better and better each time you did it. So you're actually seeing more and more. One thing I never mentioned, and I should mention now, is that once you do this, once you do the drawing, don't go back and rework it no matter how many. If I give you corrections, just note the corrections for your next drawing, but never go back and rework it because you're going to make it worse. And the whole point of this exercise was to use the right side of your brain and not use the logic side. So the minute you start thinking about corrections and putting corrections in, you're using the logic side of your brain again, and you'll probably degrade the drawing. The drawing will get actually worse if you go in and start overworking it. So never overwork anything. You know, if I give you critiques, use the critiques on the next drawing, but don't go back and correct this one. If you're going to use the critiques on the same drawing, just go back and completely redraw it. So just go through the exercise again, keeping in mind the critiques. Because what usually will happen is you start to overwork, and I've learned this through experience. Every time I overwork anything, it gets worse. It never gets better. So that's, again, just a caveat of essentially something I've learned over the years. So I never rework anything. That's the other reason why I never erase. So let me just show you what I'm going to do next. All right. Hopefully you can see this. I'm just going to flip through this. So, okay, this thing moved on me. Hold on. I did have this thing set right, so let me move it back up a hair. All right. Everybody can see this, or should I move it up higher?
That's good.
That's good? All right, the point is, these are drawings that I do from life in under 45 minutes. These are from actual models, Santa Fe models. And these were done in 2018. I mean, I've got a whole book of them. I probably have about 1,200 of these drawings from over the past 12, 13 years. So these are from, again, like I said, 45 minutes. And let me show you what these are all local models from either Santa Fe or Albuquerque. All right, I'm gonna use this model. This is Angela. This is the model if we get enough money, we're gonna have a pose for 3 hours on Zoom. I'm gonna redo this one for you today, which is a standing pose. Let me just get right to the other, and then I'm gonna essentially, this is Angela again. I'm gonna do this, redo this one, which is a seated pose. So you'll get both a standing and seated, and this is similar to what you'll get when she poses. And then, like I said, there's not that many male models around. This is one of our male models. And I couldn't talk any of them into doing Zoom, so. Again, there's a lot more female models in Santa Fe than there are male models. But these are guys I use all the time, or I did when I had actual life drawing classes. Okay, so let me pull out one of these, and I'm gonna basically go through the entire procedure and essentially redraw it for you. And again, it's not gonna be very accurate because I'm drawing from the side. I'm gonna use a felt tip pen. All right, typically when I get done with these drawings, like I clean them up with a kneaded eraser, and then I will seal them with spray fixative so I don't smudge them from then on. So you can get, again, you can get, I use matte spray fixative. There's all kinds of, there's a whole bunch of different varieties that you can get in the local art store. I use Grumbacher matte spray fixative.
Can you draw over that afterwards?
You can get two kinds. You can get one that's reworkable. You can actually erase it and draw over it, or you can get final, which you can't erase, but you can definitely draw over it. And I typically, like I said, I never erase, so I could use either one and draw over it. All right, so.
Did you use charcoal or the Wolf's pencil?
I always use Wolf. I don't use Generals. I don't use charcoal. I don't like charcoal because there's always hard bits in it, and it doesn't go on as smooth. I use Wolf. Wolf's are a combination of graphite and charcoal. They're the best pencil that I know of. I've been using them now for 30 years. I've tried everything. I've tried every type of charcoal pencil you can imagine. They call them Wolf Carbon, but that's basically, it's the Wolf pencil, which is a combination of, I don't know what the ratios are, charcoal and graphite. So it's almost the best of both worlds. It's pencil plus charcoal.
It was definitely darker. I switched to that this week, and it was definitely darker than the regular Blick pencils that I was using.
I've never used Blick. I've used Generals, but again, I don't like Generals. But tried those. I've never tried the Blick, but anything that says charcoal is charcoal. I think Wolf has the corner on the market for the combination of graphite and charcoal. Yeah. I've never seen any other pencil manufacturer use that combination. And like I said, that's what they've used at the Art League student in New York for probably over 100 years. I mean, the Wolf company was originally in England. It was a company that was, around in the 1890s, 1900s. And they went out of business in 1990, early 1990s. And then they were taken over. They were out of business for about a year and a half. And they were basically resurrected in Rochester, New York. I guess the company bought the rights to the materials that they use, and they started manufacturing the Wolves again. So now you can get them in any art store. They're about $1.50, $2 a piece. Yeah. Any of the online arts like Blick or Jerry's basically sell them. I mean, you can get probably a discount if you buy a box of them from Jerry's or Dick Blick or any of the art supply warehouses. They're standard. You can find them any place. In the early 90s, you couldn't find them, but now you can. Okay, so, all right. So what am I going to do? This is a standing figure, so I'm going to start with my action line. Well, this pen's not working. Hold on. Let's hope this one is. All right. So there's my action line. There's a slight curve to it, probably because of this leg that I have kicked out. All right, so then I'd start, the first shape I put down would be the head, and then I would put down something for the rib cage, and then something for the pelvis. I would actually use circular. I'm just showing the shapes, but I'd actually use ovals. I'd put something in, then I'd put, to go a little higher, I'd put a small action in for the shoulders, and then a small action in for the hips. Again, this is a contrapposto pose where the action line for the shoulders is in the opposite direction from the action line of the hips. I would put in a small action for the arm, small action for this arm. I put in a small action line for that leg, and then this leg would essentially be behind. So essentially I've drawn a stick figure with a couple big shapes. So that's how I'd start, okay? So in the next go around, I'm gonna actually start building up some of the small action lines. So I put the neck in.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
It seems when you drew the bent leg, you actually exaggerated it. Is that on purpose?
No, I mean, I just drew it. I'm being sloppy.
Okay.
At this stage of the game, because I go through every time and I recorrect it every time I go through, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to correct every time I go through. I'm going to make it more accurate. So I could be, at this stage, you could be as sloppy as you want. I mean, you don't have to measure anything or be really, really that accurate.
Okay.
You're just trying to get the general directions of the limbs and the big shapes down. I mean, if these legs were separated by a little bit, I'd actually use negative space to position the right leg against the left leg, but there's no space, so I really have,
Okay.
I don't have any place where I could put negative space. I could put it probably on the outside here to get
The reason I
space
asked is
there.
that one of the online courses I took emphasized that you should try to exaggerate to make the figure more dynamic. So I thought maybe you were doing that.
No. If you're
Okay.
basically using this technique, the figure automatically is going to be dynamic because you're not basically doing it piecemeal. You're working the whole figure at once. You're
Gotcha.
not erasing, and like I said, you're trying not to use the left side of your brain, the logic side of your brain. You're trying to use the right side, see what's there, put it down, don't think about it, and just keep going, okay? That's the whole point. What you're trying to do is, like I said, I got 10 tricks, you know them all. What you're trying to do is essentially see what's in front of you and not get fooled by the logic side of your brain telling you something is there that's not really there by all the information that's stored on the logic side of your brain, which is actually piecing together what you're looking at and trying to give you its interpretation of the image.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I'm finding it that I also took a painting course, and the instructor was similar in saying that you don't look at detail first. You basically try to get bold shapes, bold shadows, you know. And so I guess that's what you're.
Yep, same idea.
Yeah.
In my painting, I do the same thing. I don't look at any detail. Everything is big masses initially, really big masses and shapes. I get everything positioned, and then I keep working back into it. If this group goes on further, I'll probably do some painting demonstrations and show you how I do that, but it's pretty much the same idea, except I add color, and then you're involved in color mixing. So,
Yeah.
All right.
Great.
Okay, so now I'm going to start putting in, I'll put in some shapes for the arms. Again, I'm not being that careful right now. And again, it's not going to be that accurate because I'll put in an overall shape for the breasts. Oh, this arm is putting in like mitten shapes for the hands. There's the stomach. I'll start putting in a shape for this leg. Put in a shape for the foot. Again, I'm not being that careful. I'm just trying to get things initially placed as probably as close as I can. Okay, so that's the second step. Okay. All right, so now the third step is now I'm going to start refining it more. I'm going to actually put in a shape for her hair. I'll actually put in a line for where her eyes are eventually going to go. I'll actually split the breasts. I'll put a marker in for a navel. I'll put in some, I'll try to refine the arms a little more. Again, I'll basically put in some, start putting in some indications. I'll put in some shapes for the, refine some of the shapes for the feet a little more. Again, I'm not really being that careful. All right, so now I'm going to actually start putting in some of the darks, particularly for the cast shadows and some of the value pattern before I put any detail in. So I'll probably shade her hair in. I'll just indicate her nose, just to start with a triangular shape. Put something in for the position of her mouth. All right, I got a cast shadow onto this arm, but it's not that prominent, but I'll emphasize it a little more than I actually have it in the drawing. So that's a cast shadow. Again, I can't really do really good edges with this magic marker, so, but I'll tell you where the hard edges are when we start. Okay, there's a cast shadow under both breasts. This is slightly in shadow here. The cast shadows, again, the cast shadow is the darkest dark. Cast shadow extends over this arm. Again, I'll put in a hard edge, the hard edge for the rib cage. Again, this arm is going to be all in shadow. This side of her body's in shadow. Cast shadow is the darkest, just remember that. There's her traps, there's a cast shadow under her neck. Light's coming from above and from the left. This whole side of her face is in shadow. There's a cast shadow from her nose. Okay, so this leg here is throwing a cast shadow on the other leg. See, I'm correcting the leg as I go along, too. Put in a shape, for a little skull shape for the knee. Okay, so now I've got essentially some cast shadows in. I got a cast shadow here, 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 here. I've actually put some of the shadow after the, as you turn away from the light, basically here, here, everything on the left side of her body is in shadow. But that shadow is not as dark as the cast shadows. Now I could actually work this up more. I would start putting in some edges and some details. I would put in some details for her eyes. She's got her eyes closed. Put some details in for her mouth. I'd start fixing the nose. I'd basically start working a little more detailing on the hand. And again, a little more detail on this foot here, big toe, 1, 2, 3, 4 little toes. I put a hard edge on her shoulder. I put a slight hard edge on her cheek. I put a hard edge here where the elbow meets the upper arm meets the lower arm. Put a hard edge on the wrist bone. Again, I'd put hard edges on all these fingertips because I want this to come forward. I put a hard edge on her knee here because I want that to come forward. Again, the calf, remember, the outside's higher than the inside, and then the ankle bones go in the opposite direction. Again, I know really the left side of her body is mostly in shadow, so I keep, even though I have some hard edges here, I keep everything pretty soft because I want it to recede. And then I'd start putting the highlights in. There would be a highlight here. There would be a highlight on her breast, a little bit here, highlight under her rib cage, a highlight on this side of her stomach because the stomach's coming out. There'd be a highlight on this leg and on the kneecap, and there'd be a slight highlight here. Now the hierarchy would be, there would be highlights on her forehead and under her eye and on the tip of her nose, but these would be lighter because the light is actually focused on the upper part of her body. So the highlights would be brightest here, and they would decrease in intensity going up and down, okay? So that's the procedure. As good as I can do with a marker, okay? All right, so now we'll go to another, I'll probably do maybe more than 2 drawings for you today, so, but it'll all be the same model. All right, so now let's go to the seated pose. You got any questions about anything I did here?
Nope. When you say highlights, those are just negative spaces now. You're not using white. You wouldn't use white to fill them in yet or anything like that.
I would eventually. I mean,
You're just circling the areas that are going to.
yeah, because I can't use white on newsprint. I mean, it's not going to show up. I mean, you can see on the drawing where I showed you there were highlights is where, if I was using toned paper and doing this, you know, for real, I would have a highlight. Again, this is the highlight hierarchy. The highlights would be in the upper part because most of the light's on the upper part of her body, a little bit on her leg. So those would be the brightest ones. There's not that much on her face because her face is below the focus of the lamp. For this particular drawing.
Do you do highlights at the early stage of your drawing, or do you wait till the very end?
They're the last thing I do.
Okay.
Very last thing. I get all the values in. I use 4 or 5 values, so I would start. The first value would be the cast shadow. That's the darkest dark. Then I would shade in the area where the light is turning, where the turning edge, where you got the shadows, where the body's turning away from the light. Then I would put in, so I would go cast shadow, turning edge, then the darks from the turning edge, which would be the mid-tone darks and away from the light. And then if there's any reflected light, I don't see much. It was a little bit here to be on. Usually the reflected light would be on the edge of the outer edge of the left side of her body and her arm. There's not much there, not at least for this drawing. So that's 1, 2, 3 values. Then I would actually maybe put one other value in the darks, giving it a little more volume. So I might go a little bit darker near the turning edge. Okay, so that would be 4, and then 5 would be the highlights. And again, for each one of these cases, there's a hierarchy in terms of how light or how dark I'd make it. The last thing I do is put the white highlights in, and I'd use the white charcoal pencil, which is much less bright than the white pastel chalk. So that's actually, I mean, I can do everything with the white pastel chalk, but it would be easier for you to actually just use the white pastel chalk to put all the highlights in initially, and then go over the brightest ones with, you'd use the white charcoal pencil. So you put all the highlights in with the white charcoal pencil, which is not as bright as the white pastel chalk. And then I hit it where the light is really hitting the shoulder bone, the rib cage, the breast, which comes out, the stomach, which comes out, the leg, which is coming out, the kneecap, which is bone. I'd hit all those with the white pastel chalk to make them even brighter. So like I said, there's a hierarchy in the highlights to give this thing more dimension in.
Great.
So that would be the procedure. The highlights would be the last thing I do. In painting, the highlights are the last thing I do.
Yep.
So in both drawing and painting, the last thing I always do are the lights. And the brightest highlight is the very last thing I do. And again, I'm not worried about the mid values here because I use tone paper. If I wasn't using tone paper, if I was using white paper, I'd have to do a lot more shading for the mid values in the light and in the shadow. So I'm basically trying to save myself time so I can get as much as possibly done in 45 minutes and make it convincing using, again, 4 to 5 values, including all the darks and the lights. And actually the 5th value or 6th value would be the tone paper, which would be the mid-tone.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the game I'm playing here. This is for live classes, figure drawing, where you have a limited amount of time and the model is actually posing live for you. If you're doing this from a photograph, or you have a model that poses for you day after day after day for a huge amount of money, it would be cheap. You could put in as many values as you want. I mean, you could really, you could spend 40 hours on a drawing. And there are people that do that. I mean, any of Tony Ryder's drawings or any of his students who basically, they spend anywhere from, I guess, 10 to 40 hours on a drawing where the model poses in the same position day after day after day. And they have spy glasses so they can see every little detail, every value change, and every bump on the model's body. So, and then, that's what they do. And then, it drives models crazy because they can't move for hours except for when they take breaks, and they have to get back in the exact same position. They can't be one hair off. And, they don't like doing it, believe me. And those are usually seated poses. Or reclining poses, and still they have to be really precise, and they can't move. They cannot move at all. This technique, the model can move around. I mean, once you get the big shapes and the action lines down, the model can move around a little bit. She doesn't really have to get back in exactly the same position. That's why I was always able to get models, because they didn't have to work that hard. And we were really kind of loosey-goosey and easygoing. I mean, it wasn't like an intense. Some of these drawing classes are, the people that are in them are so damn intense about getting everything so precisely right and getting every little detail down. It turns into a nightmare particularly for models. If you're running a drawing group, that's not what you want to do, because you will lose models unless you pay them well, and even then you'll lose them. Particularly if you're not nice to them and you basically make them work like crazy for the small amount of money they get paid. So that's another plus of this technique. You don't kill your models. Okay, so I'm going to basically, same model. I'm going to do a seating pose. Now, when I'm done, I'm going to send you JPEGs of this model so that you can do the grid. You can do the grid technique again. So you got even more experience drawing this model and increasing your accuracy.
Great.
All right. So now I'm going to draw the seated pose. All right. All right. So I'm starting the same way. I'm looking at this. The action line I'd pick would be something like this. So, and then so I put the head in, I put a shape in, move this over a little bit. I put a shape in for the chest, I put a shape in for the pelvis. The shoulder, there's a small action for the shoulders, a small action for the hip pointers. Okay, so that would be my initial drawing. And then I'd start putting in, okay, so then I'd take and put something in for the arm. I put in something for this arm. Again, I'm drawing a stick figure. I put in a shape. I can't really put a line in there. I just put in a shape in for that leg. And then this leg would essentially come up like that and down. Okay? So that would be the next go around. So now you actually see I got some spaces here where I can actually put some negative space in the position of the leg in this arm. So I'll do that eventually in the next couple of go-arounds. So then what I do next is I try to I put in for traps, which would be part of the rib cage. I put in a little more for this shape for this arm. I put the shape in for the forearm. I put a mitten in shape in for the hand. I put in essentially an overall shape for the breasts. This arm, I actually put in a shape for the upper arm. The lower arm kicks out a little bit. Well, the hand's going to go off the page. Okay, so. And then I got the lower leg here, and basically that goes under like that. And then I put in a shape for this thigh. I put in a shape for this leg, and then the shape for the foot. So that would be the second go around. So I'm using exactly the same procedure. And if I was using I'd be using normally I'd be using tone paper and a 2B charcoal pencil, which you wouldn't be able to see. We've already tried that on tone paper, and the lines would be pretty light, and I wouldn't be worrying about, erasing them. I'd just draw over them every time. And in the end, they just blend into the whole drawing. You wouldn't even see them. If they're there, I actually want them there. So it actually gives the figure more action, because there's a line that shows actually the process of what I did. So I don't worry about, at this stage, I don't worry about any accuracy. I'm just worrying about getting essentially the big shapes and the action down. So now I'd start, she's got a lot of hair from the side. So I would actually put in some sort of mask for the hair so I can position some things. I basically would split the breasts. So one breast is tucked under her arm. I would use negative, and here's where I'd use negative space. So this is the negative space, and I'd use that to position. So I'm correcting the position of this leg with the negative space. Put the foot back in. All right, and so now this leg, I have the shape. I can actually use negative space again to position this back of the foot here. And you got severe foreshortening on the lower part of her leg and the calf, okay? So now to position this, I can again use negative space here, position this arm, this hand. Fortunately, I drew off the paper, but it's there. I can go back into the mitten here and actually just put a couple more shapes in for what I end up with the hands. Okay, so now I could break the face up. So from the top of the head to the bottom of the chin, if I draw halfway, that's the eye. So I put the eye socket in. The minute I have that, I can bring out the cheek and put the nose right in, right off the bat. And there's the chin. I could roughly put in where the ear is going to be, so I can now shade the hair in. Okay. So let me correct the trap. Now I'm going to go back in. And so there's a cast shadow here, which goes down her arm and partly around her breast. So next I'm going to start putting the cast shadows in. I'm actually correcting the position of the arm. It's got to come out more. So there's actually negative space under this arm here. I'll just indicate that. There's the forearm, the hand. Again, I got the fingers bunched together, so I'll start separating them. Okay, so there's cast shadow under this breast. There's cast shadow here. There's actually a cast shadow under this leg from her calf. This leg is all in shadow. So now I'm going to actually separate her to make this come forward. I'd have a real hard edge on this kneecap. So I'll put a real hard edge here. I can start filling in, there's the ankle bone, hard edge. I can start filling in some of the details of the toes. There's her big toe, some of the small toes. Okay. I can actually start putting in some details for her face. There would be her mouth, cheek. All right. Now I could start putting in some of this is in shadow. I could start putting some of these darks in. These are darks turning away from the light, not the cast shadow. Cast shadow is always the darkest dark. So let me go back and darken it even more. Now the breast. Go ahead.
What do they call the shadows that aren't cast shadows? They call them core shadows or something?
The core, the turning edge. If you look at a ball, okay, and the light's coming in this direction, there's your highlight. This would be the turning edge, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Once you turn away from the light, everything's in shadow. And if the ball's sitting on a plane, you have a cast shadow, which would be your darkest dark. And it'd start with a hard edge and then slowly get lighter as you got reflected light into it. So these, essentially, the darkest part of what you'd call a core shadow, if you want to call it that, is basically near the turning edge. And as you get away from it, the shadow gets lighter because you get reflected light coming back in from the room. So the shadow is a little bit lighter here. So what I would worry about is basically I'd find where the turning edge would be. So in this case, it's right here, and it's basically on the bottom of her arm here. And then I'd fill that in. But then if I got some reflected light, I'd make the shadow a little bit lighter, okay? So
Okay.
I would have at least two values here. So one, this would be a shadow coming away from the light at the turning edge, and then it'd get a little bit lighter as it got towards the outside edge of the body where it gets, so you can actually see it here because I have reflected light coming back in. So there's the turning edge, and then as I go towards the outside of the leg, it gets lighter. So that would be, in the shadow, you got three things to worry about. If you're only using 5 or 6 values, you've got the cast shadow, which is the darkest dark, which you put in first. Then you find the turning edge. Here's the turning edge here. Here's the turning edge here. There's a turning edge on her face. It's not really well defined. A turning edge on her neck. Okay, the light's coming from above and from the left. Part of the reason, there's a cast shadow on her shoulder from her neck that I didn't put in, so it's right here. So you look for the cast shadows first. Okay, that's where, at least near the start of the cast shadow, that's where the light is totally being blocked. Okay, you put those in first. And as you move away from where the cast shadow is blocking everything, it gets lighter and the edge gets softer because you got reflected light coming back in. Then you look for the turning edge. Okay, there's a turning edge on her arm, there's a turning edge on her leg, and then you basically put your next value in, which would be your value of the shadow in after the turning edge, which would be not as dark as the cast shadow. And then as you go towards the outside edge of the body, you're going to have reflected light coming back in from the room in most cases. And you actually see it on this leg coming out here. I actually made the shadow a little bit lighter. But that shadow is never as light as anything in the light. And part of what's in the light is the midtone and the highlights that I put in later on. So the midtone actually forms part of the value pattern in the light, which gets darker as I move towards the turning edge, which is where all the light is being, where you're turning away from the light.
So the edge of the leg, let's say, that's in the core shadow, would have a soft edge rather than a hard edge, right? You wouldn't put a hard edge.
No, but it depends on the lighting. Normally, it wouldn't be hard. It would be, it would be darkest at where the core shadow starts, but you notice it's pretty blurred here. I don't have it anywhere near as I have. There's a cast shadow under her leg here. And you notice how it starts out, how hard that edge is right here.
Yeah.
So here the edge is really hard, and then it blurs away. Okay, the core shadow here, the edge is not quite as hard, and it actually blurs away towards the bottom of her leg. And here on the front part of her leg, you can actually see where the core shadow, the turning edge starts. But it's nowhere near as hard as the cast shadow, and then it actually gets much lighter much quicker than here because I'm getting reflected light, and where it turns away from the light is not as confined as, is not as extensive as on her thigh, which is being tucked under. So it's a hierarchy, okay?
Yeah.
All edges are, everything I'm doing is, there's edges in 4 or 5 or 6 values, but there's a hierarchy even in those values. Okay, but each value that I'm giving you has a specific name. You have the cast shadow, which I do number 1, core shadow, which I do number 2, and then I shade away from the core shadow until I get to if there's any reflected light. Okay, and then I go back and I'd work the midtones in the light, but the paper takes care of that. And then I put the highlights in, and there would be a hierarchy in the highlights. Initially, I put them in with a white charcoal pencil, which would be much lighter and not as bright as what I touch it up with, which is white pastel chalk to make it really bright. So here, you've actually seen it, what I've done here. I've touched it up with the white pastel chalk. It's really bright on her kneecap. It's really bright on her shoulder because it's hitting bone. It's bright on the top of her breast because that's it's an object coming forward. All right. And now the other thing you notice about the breast is there again, you see the core shadow. There it is right there. And basically the breast is like a ball. Immediately as you move away from the core shadow, you can actually see it gets lighter. There's a reflected light coming from her chest. And then underneath her breast is the cast shadow, which is the darkest dark. Okay. So it's all there. So each piece of the body that if you really wanted to work this thing for hours, you could take each part of the body and go through the same sequence of value pattern and edges for each piece of the body, but it have to be consistent with the rest of the body. The whole is always the most important thing. So in principle, you don't need to put all that detail in, because if you put detail in sort of in the areas where you want your eye to focus, your brain fills in the rest of it. I mean, like this leg, I have almost nothing because I want it to go back. I don't want it to be important. And it's basically foreshortened and it's in shadow. So there's almost no work there, okay? Where I put in all the work is right up here. I mean, it's really in this upper part of the body where I want you to look, because that's where I'm identifying the model, personalizing the model. And that's where all the interesting value patterns are. So I would put the most work in terms of detail and how much work I put in the value pattern and the edges. I put it up here, and I put less and less as I go down the body. But I'd have to put some in there to make it convincing. I mean, I couldn't go from a lot of detail here to no detail down here. It would be too abrupt. Okay, so again, on this thing, I would, next thing I do is I start putting edges in, a hard edge for the shoulder, again, where the elbow goes into the upper arm goes into the lower arm, particularly on this leg would really be important because I want that knee to come forward. But nice hard edge there, hard edge on this kneecap, hard edge on the shoulder here, but not as hard as this one. Then I'd start putting the highlights in here, 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 under the rib cage, particularly right here on this leg because I want it to come out, a little bit on the forearm here, a little bit on the calf here. And again, there would be a hierarchy in the highlights in terms of how bright they are. Okay, so are there any, I'm probably going to go through one more drawing for you guys, and then you can ask. Are there any more questions?
But anyway.
Yeah, we're back. I got my internet basically went out shortly, so.
Yeah,
okay, so are there any more questions? Yeah, you want me to do another one?
Yeah, if you want to,
Sure.
It's helpful.
All right, let's do another one.
I see the process, though. I think this would be a fun exercise to try to do that with a few.
All right. You want another female or you want a male?
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Really not going.
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Whatever you think is the best.
Variety of poses is more important, I think.
Yeah.
Let's do a male. And hopefully the internet won't go out again on my end.
I know where you can get more students if you need more students.
I do need more students because if we're going to do this drawing,
yeah.
If we're gonna do the, what I want to do is essentially the next meeting I want to set up and have the model do 3-hour life poses, but I need to pay her at least $60, so I need at least 6 people coming in with at least $10 each.
Can you get us to commit ahead of time? And
yeah, that's what I'm going to do.
you're not going to. I'd be happy to pay ahead of time, but I don't know if you can get people to do that. But if they do that, then they're more likely to at least pay for the model, whether they show up or not.
Next newsletter I'm going to send out, I'm going to ask for people to commit, not for money, but to commit to see if I can actually get 6 people to come up with $10. It looks like there's several people that weren't here today want to do this, and they're going to chip in the $10. So it looks like we almost have enough. Maybe we'll pick up some more people that want to draw from life, just don't want anything critiqued or don't want anyone looking at the drawings.
Would there be anything wrong with asking people to pay the model ahead of time, just so that she knows she's got to go?
Oh no, you're going to have to pay her ahead of time.
Okay, good.
And this model I've used for years. I trust her explicitly. You're not going to lose your money or anything. So,
and if there are more students, she gets to have a profit, right? I mean.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. I mean, she needs to make at least 60. That by Santa Fe standards, that's what they get paid for 3 hours. No, and anything else beyond that, she keeps. That's gravy for her. So.
Yeah.
The more money she makes.
It's probably hard times for them. So I think
it is.
Yeah.
There's a thing called Meetup. Have you heard of Meetup?
Yeah, I was involved in it for a while. It basically, the problem with Meetup is you get people in that you really don't want in. So I'd rather. The model's already had problems with people, getting into meetings that take screenshots and post it online. I don't, I don't want to deal with Meetup. I used Meetup for a while, then I got one guy in that was nuts, who I had to throw out of the class that I was running. And I mean, the guy was psycho. And I mean, apparently he's been thrown out of every drawing group and every pottery group in Santa Fe. He's one of these really rich guys. It's completely crazy. And I got him through Meetup. So that's when I stopped using Meetup.
Oh, I see.
I mean, I've had to throw people out of drawing groups that I've run for years that were open to the public, and you get some real crazies, and usually they're on medication, and if they go off their meds, they're a real problem. And this has happened. I mean, I've been doing this for 30 years, and it's happened over and over again, where you get someone in the class, usually a guy, never a woman. Well, there was one woman once that was actually nuts and violent. So, I mean, but it's usually a guy, and they're usually crazy and usually on medication. And if they go off their meds, there's always a problem. So I'd rather keep it private and, just people that actually are artists who really want to learn how to draw and paint and stuff, and I really don't want the general public to participate in these things, particularly online, that they can actually take screenshots and post stuff against her will. Yeah. So, and when I do this, once you pay in, the only people that pay in and actually participate will have access to. I will record a video with her permission, or she'll record it and we'll post it on my YouTube site. I mean, I'll arrange all this with her, but only people that actually have paid in will have access to that video. So you can go back and rework your drawings or redo the whole thing. So it's like getting not just 3 hours, but on a session indefinitely, if she agrees to it, which I think she will. But again, if she makes more, the more money she makes, the more things she'll probably agree to in terms of doing this.
Great.
So, okay. Again, this is a guy that I've used for several years. So this is a side pose. It's a seated, and again, he's, it's not a stiff pose. He's got his arms and legs in different positions. So essentially, that would be my first, that'd be my big action. And then I would start with the head. And then I put something in for the chest, something in for the pelvis. And then the small action for the shoulders and for the hips go into the plane so you can't see them. So I'd immediately start putting in some shapes, some lines for the legs, line for this leg, a line for this arm. I put something in for the neck and a line for this arm like that, okay? So again, stick figure. Not being real careful because I'm going to correct it as I go along. Okay, so then I'd go in and I'd start I'd start filling in some of the smaller shapes. Okay, so the arm would essentially, I'd put in the arm like this, and I put a mitten in at the end of the hand. So this arm I put in like that. And then I'm looking at this negative space here to position this. I repositioned this knee. I didn't have it right. So I put that in, put the shape in for the bottom, for the calf. And again, I position the calf where there's negative space there. Okay, so that's that. And then I put the shape in. So again, there's I have slight negative space here. Okay. And then I put this leg in, shape for that, shape for this calf coming back, shape for the foot. Again, I'd probably use this negative space here to position that. All right, and this foot here would come out like that. Okay, so that's step 2, okay? I'm doing the same thing again. It's the same procedure, different pose, different gender of model, but it's the same procedure. So I'm not doing anything that's, I mean, like I said, I got 10 tricks and I keep telling you the same tricks over and over again. What it all comes down to is you actually being able to see what's in front of you, and that requires you using the right side of your brain. That's why that grid exercise is really so important, because it actually, you've seen the improvement in your drawing once you do the grid.
Oh, yeah.
You put everything aside, your drawing is, it's like night and day. And I've never seen it not work. I mean, it always works because you're forced to use the right side of your brain. And that's the whole point of doing it. Okay, so then I'd go in, I'd start putting in, I'd put in again, halfway down from the top of his head to his chin. So that gives me the eye socket. Here's the cheek. I'm gonna put in his nose immediately. So that's there. He's got fluffy hair. I'd sort of indicate that. His ear is about here. Okay, and then I put the back of his neck. So shoulders are a little bit too low. Okay, I started putting more shapes in for the arms. I put the bicep in, the tricep. There's the break. There's the elbow. Here's the forearm. I don't have it quite right, so I'd actually angle it off a little bit better. Okay, then I put his hand in, put the fingers in. This arm, I pretty much got that in. And put this skin. This is his back leg. And put the shape in for his knee. Okay, there's the foot, there's the ankle. I'd start putting in some shapes for the more detail on the foot. This foot's coming out, there's his big toe there. Okay. So now the next thing I do is I put in the cast shadow. Well, his shoulder's here. And it's all in, this is all, he's got a cast shadow that's going from his shoulder. It overlaps his left leg. So that, again, it starts with a hard edge where the light is completely being blocked. Dark gets lighter as you go away from it. Actually, in this drawing, there's a cast shadow on his arm from his face. Okay, put that in. This leg is throwing a cast shadow on this. I have like he's on a blanket, so there's a cast shadow here, which would help bring this leg out a little bit. So there's a cast shadow here. There's a cast shadow in back. Again, I'm actually filling in the negative space with a cast shadow. So then I'd actually go in and I'd start putting in, I'd look for the turning edge. There's a turning edge here. So there's some shadow here. There's a turning edge on the leg here, a really pronounced one. So I put the shadow in there. There's a turning edge here. I put the shadow in there. His toes are in shadow. Okay, then I'd actually put a little more detail. He had a beard, so I'd sort of indicate that. There's his nose. I guess you can barely see his mouth. There's his chin. Put his eye in. I'd start to redraw the shoulder again because I want a hard edge on that shoulder. So I want a hard edge on the scapula. And then I put a hard edge on the knee. I want that to come forward. Again, the break here from the elbow, I put a hard edge, break here. All right, I'd shade his hair in. He's got curly hair, so I'd really make it squiggly. Yeah, I think he had like a goatee. Here's his cheek. Put the ear back in. Okay, so you see where this is going, right? So, and then I got my midtones, and now I would start, I'd put more detail in for the ear. I'd actually put a little more detail in for his toes. So I'd put his toes in. I'd put his fingers in over here. Okay, so there's a slight, very, very light, little bit of variation where his chest is turning in under his arm. So there's a slight shadow there. I mean, there's some reflected light here, so this would actually get lighter as it goes towards the edge of his thigh. Same with the front calf, it gets a little lighter as you go towards the outside edge because of reflected light coming back in from this side. Okay. So then I go and do the highlights. I got a highlight here. I mean, a highlight on the upper part of his rib cage. There's a highlight running down his arm. This back leg, although it's seeing some light, I'm leaving in mid-tone because I don't want it to come out. I want this side of his body to come out. So I put a highlight here. There's a highlight on this, a highlight on his knee, highlight on his calf, highlight on his ankle, highlight on his foot. So this whole right side of his body is seeing a lot of light, and I want that to come forward. Again, there's not much highlight on his face. It's mostly, I just left it mostly the neutral tone of the paper because the light is really being focused on the upper part of his body, which is usually where you focus the lamp, okay? So it's, again, and then I put in some, he was on a blanket or something, and so, again, I put in some hard edges for the blanket, and I put some highlights here, and I guess, again, it would be a cast shadow, a very slight one, because the light, even though it's coming in from this direction, he's casting a shadow from the upper part of his scapula down onto the blanket. And then I put some highlights on the blanket just to make it interesting, and then I actually add a little bit of the blanket here. So, and then, again, it's the same procedure every time, okay? All right, so are there any questions on this? No?
Looks good.
All right, so you got any other questions? Because we've been at this for probably over an hour.
Yeah, just
So,
about. Yeah. So you'll send those the
yeah.
3 puzzles to us.
I'll send all 3 if you want, or I'll just send the 2 of the model we're going to use. It's up to you.
Send all 3 if you would.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, then that's what I'll do. Hopefully we didn't lose the recording when this, no, stop recording. It's still recording. Okay, good. All right, so I'm going to sign off, and we'll try to get the figure group drawing for next week sometime, and I'll send you one. I'm going to send out an email first, seeing how many people are interested, will commit to it, and if we get enough money, I'll line the model up, we'll set a time frame, and then you just have to pay the model directly through her PayPal account, and I'll make sure I, contact her and set that whole thing up, and I'll let you know what her address is and how to pay her and all that. So
are you hoping to do it at this Thursday time is great for me, but I don't know if that's going to be.
I'll try to do it every Thursday at 10:30 a.m. So.
Good for me. It's good for me.
Yeah, obviously the people that make it is good for them, but
yeah, well,
but yeah.
No one is basically, I've asked people if they wanted a different time, and no one's ever said they wanted any different time. So most of the people that weren't here today emailed me with some reason that they weren't going to be able to make it.
So
I guess they probably did do the exercise, but that doesn't matter. I don't care whether they do the exercise or not. That's for their own improvement.
Yeah,
they can actually see the immediate improvement. So whether they do it or not is up to them. So, but like I said, I only got 10 tricks, and you learned them all over and over again. So there's not much else I can tell you, except to critique the work drawings and the work that you're doing, and maybe if this continues to go on to painting. So
terrific.
So you guys, is there anything else you guys want before I sign off?
No, this is very helpful.
Thank you very,
Okay.
very much. Really appreciate it.
No, it's my pleasure. Okay, so I'm going to end it, and we'll see what happens. Okay, and if you know anyone that wants to participate, get them on board.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
I mean, $10. They're not only getting the model for 3 hours, then they got the video indefinitely, and then they got me critiquing the work and helping them out. So
Yeah. Would you be receptive to newcomers, as I mentioned? 'Cause
Yeah.
they can probably look at your previous exercises to get ready for it.
yeah, now I've been trying to do this through Udemy, trying to get more people to come in from Udemy by posting the fact that I have these exercises posted on YouTube. So I had a big jump about 3 weeks ago. It went from like 3 or 4 people up to 9 or 10 for the next 2 weeks. And this week it would have been probably 5 or 6, except about 4 people basically emailed me and said they couldn't make it. So for various reasons.
So I have a friend who might be interested in able to do it. So I'll reach out to him.
That'd be great.
Okay, great.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay.
So I'm going to end it.